Cosmic horror poses many questions to those who indulge in the genre. Do we matter? Do we have any control? What is reality? H.P. Lovecraft was a member of a relatively small group of literary nerds and weirdos who like to play with these very specific gray areas, turning them most often into dark, violent, dystopian realities. The Other Gods is a short story written by H.P. Lovecraft, though while only a few pages long, manages to pull out almost every single one of his favorite concepts and allows him an opportunity to dust off some of his favorite creations as well. Now, I've been planning to do some cosmic horror review content for all of you out there, and I came across an animated short of The Other Gods. Now, for your viewing pleasure and for my analysis, I present to you an animated short, The Other Gods, from animator Peter Rhodes. I'll let it play out in its 6-minute entirety, and then we'll start to delve a little bit deeper into the story itself, how it was adapted, and the director, Peter Rhodes himself. Enjoy. What happened to Barzai the Wise? Well, let's break the story down a little bit. H.P. Lovecraft, one of his absolute favorite motifs is that what we think we know could not be further from the truth, right? And Lovecraft very much enjoys playing with the concept of religion, and that the idea that displays of great power are what make a god, right? So very often you'll find cosmic gods, which are really just disturbing beings that just have a lot of power to enact their will. And usually their will is to drive everyone insane. This story follows that, tied very, very well in with the hubris of man. Barzai the Wise represents the hubris of man entirely. He is a wise man who, within the story, is leaned on by the people of Ulthar for scientific understanding. He was the one who, if you are familiar with Lovecraft's works, decided to enact a law that you basically got to be nice to cats, which is a good thing in the Lovecraft mythos. Barzai the Wise decides that not only does he know so much about the earth and the gods of the earth, that even though within their story, the gods of the earth have been climbing higher and higher up the mountain because they just don't want humans to look at them, basically, Barzai the Wise decides, well, no, they would love to speak with me. So I'm going to climb the mountain Kadath, and I'm going to look upon the earthly gods, and they and I are going to have a discourse, and we are going to be better, right? You may have seen at the beginning of that short that this is a dream quest story, right? And H.P. Lovecraft is known most likely for his Cthulhu works, right? Big flabby monster living in another dimension under the sea, asleep, and when he wakes up, everyone goes crazy, right? Probably his most well-known works. Well, he also has the dream side of it, and this is one of those stories within that aspect. And one of the things that isn't really touched on in this short is that the gods of Earth are said to travel in these cloud ships, right? And while they essentially ran away from humanity further up and up these mountains, eventually they just left the mountain entirely, and they only come back to the top of this mountain, Kadath, every now and again, basically to reminisce and dance and just kind of enjoy the area, right? And Barzai the Wise is said to have been able to determine when they would come back to the top of this mountain. So he and his assistant, right, Atul the assistant or the disciple, go and scale this mountain, although it is only Barzai the Wise who has the determination, the grit, and ultimately the hubris to finish scaling the mountain and actually gaze upon the earthly gods. Now, as is standard with Lovecraftian works, the more intelligent you are, the bigger a pile of shit you end up stepping in. And Barzai has reached the top of the mountain, and he looks upon the earthly gods dancing about, but it is in that moment that an eclipse that no one was able to predict, because it is not an earthly phenomenon, right? And because Barzai is actually at the top of Mount Kadath, watching the earthly gods dance, what he believes for him entirely, again, a perfect window into the absolute pure narcissistic hubris that this character has, there is a portal, an opening into the deeper reality, right? And Barzai the Wise is shown that everything he thought he knew, right? He thought that the earthly gods were the gods, but in this unearthly eclipse, he is shown that these are mere pawns. These are gibbering playthings for the true power of the world. And that is, Barzai the Wise actually is party to a rare, I'm going to show you everything, right? So usually in the Lovecraftian stories, it'll be one monster, you know, oftentimes within the actual Lovecraftian writings itself, seeing a dead body kind of just drives you crazy, let alone a legitimate Lovecraftian cosmic god, right? And yet, Barzai the Wise is shown a panoply of madness-inducing gods, right? He is exposed to Shub-Niggurath, he's exposed to Azathoth, he's exposed to Nyarlathotep. I mean, he has shown everyone, and he is not only driven insane, he is swallowed unto the sky itself, right? Another thing that is lost within the short is the final line, which is, I'm falling into the sky, which is such a beautifully disturbing thing for his disciple to hear. Another thing that you may not have picked up on is the only reason why we know any of this story is because Atul the disciple, though loyal and following his master, could not bring himself to actually summit the mountain, and therefore was able to hear all of the things that Barzai called out. When Barzai said, I am being held in place by Yog-Sothoth, Atul heard that. Atul heard his screams. At first he hears these cries of joy, you know, this, I've done it, I've succeeded, I am essentially on the same level as these earthly gods. And then he starts to hear it devolve into the maddening shrieks of a man who has just been exposed to the madness that lies behind the curtain. And it's a really, really great story. And I wanted to make sure that I kind of clarify some of those points because, again, deeply disturbing, deeply dystopian, but also I do find it interesting that, to my knowledge at least, Barzai the Wise is the only character that has seen multiple actual cosmic gods, right? So that's interesting. Now, to move on from the story analysis, I'd like to start talking a little bit more about Peter Rhodes, right? And the most important thing that I think I should talk about is the fact that he never existed. Remember how I said one of the most prevalent questions in the Cthulhu mythos is, what is reality, right? Now, it could be seen as kind of like a cheap marketing tactic to just kind of like ARG your way into the game. But what's interesting, and I've actually got access to a few interviews with the true creator of this short, he references probably one of the only other things that is most famous about Lovecraft's works is the Necronomicon, right? And if you don't know, which you should if you're this far into the video, is that the Necronomicon is a fictional tome of dark magic and knowledge and wisdom, and it is essentially the access point for true madness and influence between Earth and the cosmic gods, right? And you'll see it referenced over and over and over. There are people throughout history who have written their own Necronomicons, and you can go on Amazon and buy a copy and stuff. But the thing is, right, it's a creation from H.P. Lovecraft. It was fiction. He created the mad Arab Alhazred, right, who was supposedly the person that wrote it in the first place, right? Essentially channeling madness itself. You see a reference in Skyrim, right? Anywhere where you see a book that kind of like drives you insane when you pick it up, it's a reference to H.P. Lovecraft's works. And what's interesting is that it's spiraled so far away from Lovecraft himself that there are people who legitimately think that the Necronomicon is a physical book that exists in the real world, and that perhaps you could stumble across it, right? Being the nerdy little weirdo that I am, I just hope that that's the case, and it would be really cool to stumble across the Necronomicon myself. But point being, in that same vein, the actual creator of this short decided to kind of touch on that, as I said before, ARG kind of pliability that reality actually has to it, right? In many ways, we are able to speak and create a reality within the minds of others, which is to say that, in a weird way, we can create our own realities. It's just whether or not it is an objective reality, in which case, most of cosmic horror deals with the fact that we don't really have the means, hardware or software, to interpret objective reality. So why not turn everything evil and violent? So right now, my friends, we're going to listen to a few snippets of audio from the true creator of this short, Michael Boas, and he actually shares a lot about what his thought process was when it comes to how to adapt this short, and he also talks about some of the difficulties in trying to set the narrative of the short the way that he wanted to. So I'm going to play a few of the clips, and then we're going to talk a little bit more about him at the end.
Bring it out into the open that your website makes it sound like this was real, and I was sucked in. I'll tell you, I thought it was real. I was one of those people that thought, how have I not heard of this movie?
That's the danger. Yeah, my website, maddogmovies.com, I have up there stuff about my films, and the latest film is H.P. Lovecraft's The Other Gods. And the goal from the beginning was to do a Lovecraft film, and I said, well, how can I, have fun with it?
Yeah.
And part of that was creating a director, an imaginary animator from 1920-something, who did his own Lovecraft film. And so I have this false front going on there, and then I have trouble talking about it with people because I don't know whether to lie to them or not.
Yeah.
But I figure it's a fun thing. Lovecraft invented the Necronomicon, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, he had this book, and he had other books in his stories, and then other people would pick up on it, and they'd write about it, and the more people wrote about it, the more people thought it was real. But then it was a big wink to everybody.
Yeah.
So I figure it's in the spirit of the horror writer.
So in this first clip, Mike starts describing how he came to the realization that he could portray a bit like the mad Arab Alhazred was portrayed to be the creator of the Necronomicon. He could create a fictional character to portray his animated short of Lovecraft's work. And one of the most fascinating things about this is, like I said, not only is it something that happened very often with Lovecraft's works, the cosmic horror circle has a very unique identity of being very self-referential, right? And you have many writers that will take bits and pieces and craft a narrative from a larger mythos, right? And I find it very interesting that Mike decided to utilize that aspect. And as we're about to hear, he actually went very, very deep into the creation of this Peter Rhodes character that you don't actually see a lot come across in his work. So I'm actually really happy to be playing bits and pieces from these interviews for you all. Let's take a listen.
And so when I got around to saying, hey, I want to do a short Lovecraft film, I didn't know what I was going to do. I did a lot of thinking about it, reading like everything I could. And then I said, wait, what if I was watching cable, and they were showing an old silent feature from 1926, Vladi Reiniger's Prince Ahmed. And I'd seen it before, but I hadn't thought about it. It was like a lightning bolt. I went, oh, they were doing like silhouette style animation, or this woman was from Germany in the 20s. what if I did it that way? And then so if I did it that way, I could create someone who did it, and then it became more fun for me. I had to find out who this person was. I had to find out who the character was. So I came up with this whole backstory for him and why he got, who he was and when he was born and who his brother was, and then when he went to New York and met Lovecraft and met other people in the occult scene. And I had this, I had that all thought out so that I knew how he would approach doing this film.
Now, I am excluding a vast majority of the interview that was conducted with Mike Bowes about his work here, but I find it very interesting, like I said, the depth that he actually put into for the backstory of Peter Rhodes. Now, the interviewer actually did ask him whether or not he had plans to make some kind of larger work just from that backstory, because Peter Rhodes as a character is the brother of a character that essentially, in true Lovecraftian style, gets pulled into a mythos-related mystery, ties with cult and dark being worship that eventually ends up taking his life. And Peter Rhodes' way of processing that and kind of fighting back against the horrors is to produce these kinds of entertainment for everyone. So it is fascinating to me, like I said, the amount of care and attention to detail. And again, that's another thing that just is part and parcel with cosmic horror as a genre. It's one of the reasons why I appreciate it so much.
I fear that, guys like Peter Jackson did a documentary about a filmmaker in New Zealand. It was all made up.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and it's called Forgotten Silver. It's terrific. It's a terrific documentary. It aired on TV in New Zealand. Had interviews with guys like Leonard Maltin and Sam Neill and big names in New Zealand film, and they were all straight faced talking about this guy that everyone had forgotten about, but it was all made up. And then it aired on TV, and people wrote angry letters when they found out. How dare you fool me? That sort of thing. So that's something I don't want to. Not that I've got the crowd of people watching me that he would. But
well, sure, but it's a long tradition. I mean, it goes back to Orson Welles.
Yeah, right. War of the Worlds. Yeah, and that's why when I send this out to festivals, I think I included it with what I sent you. I have this little false sort of press kit thing.
Yeah.
It's glued shut, and you can open it up to find out the secrets.
Right, and of course I opened it right away.
Yeah, of course. Apparently I should write open after watching.
Yeah. Do not open this. No, that wouldn't work. Tell people to open it right away, and they won't. The one thing in there, the one sentence that really stood out to me in that little letter was you said, "I find the blurring of fantasy and reality appropriate when approaching Lovecraft's work."
Right.
Why do you find that appropriate?
Basically because of what I was saying earlier about Lovecraft creating a universe, creating ideas of sort of occult books and things that were just beyond reality, in between our reality and another spiritual world. And he creates this and then sort of gives it to the world and says, here, you do what you want with it. And he had other writers that he'd communicate with, and they'd all write their own stories that included the Necronomicon or the Panoptic manuscripts or other things, or even the gods, Cthulhu, and so there was a blurring there.
Right.
And to this day, because Lovecraft's works are in the public domain, and there are festivals like the Lovecraft Film Festival where people say, yes, I want to do that too. I want to be part of that. I want to, and so everyone gets to sort of take part and participate in, these stories which sometimes are about losing your mind or what is out there that you can't see that's beyond normal reality.
I really enjoyed this last clip with Mike because it really strengthens that concept that I was talking about earlier, how cosmic horror has, from the very start, from the small group of nerdy little weirdos writing weird stuff to make each other happy, right? It was more incidental than anyone else wrote it. It was just a bunch of nerds trying to write cool stuff for each other, right? And in that exact same vein, you have Mike talking about how it's kind of funny and funky that he's like, hey, here's this lost media that's kind of goofy, a little bit silly, right? But in a much larger sense, he's interacting with the fabric, the very unique identity that is cosmic horror. And he's doing so in a way that shows his actual love for the genre, right? Cosmic horror can be subject to some more cash grabby kind of iterations. And when I first saw the short, I was like, all right, that's kind of interesting. But it was seeing the behind the scenes with Mike and listening to the things that he learned through his own research and the ways that he personally wanted to interact with the mythos, and most of them being ways that we couldn't even really pick up on inherently, right? Like in that one short. So I felt it very, very appropriate to use this as one of the first cosmic horror reviews for the channel. I thought that it was going to be much shorter, being like a 6-minute short, but it ended up being a pretty standard length video anyway. So anyway, I will leave a link to Mike's website in the description and in a pinned comment up at the top. I do have a short list of other cosmic horror media, movies, games, stuff like that I want to look at and review for you all. And if you have something specific that you want me to take a look at, definitely let me know in the comments below.